Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here, and a new bill was just adopted into the House of Commons in support of UBI, or Universal Basic Income.
A bill entitled An Act to Establish a National Strategy for a Guaranteed Basic Income. This motion is deemed adopted.
Now, guaranteed basic income, universal basic income, these words are used sort of interchangeably with one another, but no matter what you call it, this is certainly a hot button issue with many passionate supporters and many just as passionate detractors. So in this video, we're going to go over exactly what's included in this bill, where the current political parties stand in terms of their support or lack of support for it based on recent statements, as well as how this is going to affect you and how likely it is to be passed. But before we do, if you haven't already done so, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to keep supporting Canadian content like this right here on YouTube. And as we all know, there's not quite enough of that. So first things first, if you don't already know about universal basic income or guaranteed livable income, the idea is that many Canadians would be able to receive monthly checks from the government to help keep them above the poverty level. It's something that's been floated by many different politicians, and in recent years it seems to be gathering more and more support, but many do say that there are problems with it that we'll get to in a little bit. But before we get into that, we need to take a look at this particular bill and see what it's actually pushing for and what it actually means. Let's go take a look at it. And here is the bill itself. It's Bill C-273, an act to establish a national strategy for guaranteed basic income. Now, I've read through this bill myself, and we're going to pick out the parts that are most important for you. To summarize the bill, they say this enactment requires the Minister of Finance to develop a national strategy to assess implementation models for a guaranteed basic income program as part of Canada's innovation and economic growth strategy. It also provides for reporting requirements in relation to the strategy. So if this bill were to pass through the House of Commons, the Minister of Finance, now remember that's Chrystia Freeland, she would have to sort of assemble a task force to do the things that they're going to lay out further in this bill. They would have to establish a pilot project in one or more provinces to test models of implementation of a guaranteed basic income program. They'd have to create a framework of national standards to guide the implementation of a guaranteed basic income program in any province, and they would have to support research programs that will provide evidence to guide the design and implementation of a guaranteed basic income program in each province, including through collaboration with international organizations and institutions with experience of similar programs. So to summarize and to simplify, this bill wouldn't actually bring a universal basic income into existence. No, this would be more about gathering the required data and research in order to determine what is the best way to roll out a program like this in the future. But in order to get a better idea as to whether or not something like this could be passed in the future, we need to take a look at each individual political party's current stance based on recent comments as to whether or not they'd support a universal basic income. And this will also help us understand whether or not this bill in particular would be something that would pass to get us closer to that. First, let's start with the party that's currently in power here in Canada, the Liberals. Now, some new statements have just been made that may lead you to believe that they're actually considering this more closely than before. The Liberal member of Parliament who brought this bill into the House of Commons recently made some comments in a recent Huffington Post article. Let me show you what they say. She says, "I will tell you that I do know that there's cabinet ministers that are very supportive of basic income," the Toronto MP told Huffington Post Canada during a virtual meeting availability to discuss her bill on Thursday. "There's a broad swath of Liberal caucus members who support the idea," she said. "I don't want to give you the number, but it's quite a few." Now, we already knew that support in the Liberal Party for a policy like this was growing, right? Back in November, we saw them actually bring this policy to the forefront of their discussions at the Liberal National Convention, where they sort of get together to hash out which way the party's going to go and their views on certain different topics. This differs, however, from the Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's views on the issue. In his mandate letter to Chrystia Freeland, he said that he wanted this stimulus, the CRB, to be very targeted and time-limited. Many people hope that the CRB and the CERB would eventually morph into some sort of universal basic income program, but it seems that Justin Trudeau doesn't think the same. Now, of course, views can change over time, but it seems that at least at this point, the Liberal Prime Minister isn't supportive of this, but support of this is actually growing inside of his very own party. Next, we need to take a look at whether or not the Conservative Party of Canada would be in support of something like this. And if you know anything about the Conservative Party, they're very budget focused, right, and are very worried about spending. So it's likely that they wouldn't support this. And lately, Conservative members of Parliament, such as former Finance Minister Pierre Poilievre, have been very critical of the Liberal government and their spending.
So why is it, Mr. Speaker, that workers abroad get paychecks while ours here at home just get credit card debts?
This touches on one of the main criticisms of a program like this. How are we going to pay for it? Now, the traditional answer is that maybe we'll tax the more wealthy Canadians so that we're able to provide this sort of program for lower income Canadians. But many people believe that both sides of this argument have it wrong, both the people who think that it's going to be too expensive and the people who think that we should tax the wealthy in order to enact it. Instead, many point to the way that tax revenue hasn't really paid for many programs in Canada, and instead the massive spending of the government has been financed on cheap government debt. Now, there's been millions and millions and even billions of dollars of money added to the system every single week, and I recently made a video about how that works, so if you're interested in that, then check out that video. Now, in Conservative parties across the country, there's also a demonstration of a lack of support for programs like this. A while back, the Ontario government implemented a pilot project that was trying to test ideas like these. But when the new government was voted in, this program was quickly scrapped. So most evidence points to the conclusion that the Conservative Party wouldn't support a program like this. As for the NDP, they're largely in support of an idea like this, but not this bill in particular, and I'll show you why. In that same article, Leah Gazan, an NDP MP, said that there's a dangerous flaw in the bill because it leaves the door open for vital social assistance programs to be cut and replaced. And she also says that it's sort of repeating work that's already been done, saying it's yet another pilot project, it's not a strategy, it's not an implementation strategy, it's just another study. And this points to another issue that we would have to face as a country if we decided to implement a plan like this. We already have so many social services, employment insurance, and other programs that support Canadians. Now, would we sort of cancel these programs and sort of make this base UBI or this check that people would receive? Would that have to cover those other programs? Or would this be a new program on top of existing programs? There is a danger that if we shift over to this basic income approach, that other programs could suffer as a result, and whether or not that would actually improve people in these precarious situations that would largely benefit from programs like this, that remains to be seen. As with many things in the government, the devil's really in the details, and we wouldn't know for sure how a program like this would work until we actually saw a solid plan in front of us. As a result, you can't make any conclusions as to whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing, because again, the devil is in the details. We all know that in certain situations, the government can sort of overcomplicate things and really struggle to implement new programs like this. So whether or not it would be rolled out in an effective manner is a huge consideration. As for the Bloc Québécois, it's been rather difficult to find any information on where they would stand on this particular issue. But the Green Party, on the other hand, has made their position a little bit more clear. The leader of the Green Party recently held a round table in which they were talking about exactly this issue. Let me show you a little bit of what she had to say.
There's no question that our piecemeal system has not succeeded in covering everyone. And for this reason, there is a growing momentum about the need to investigate a made in Canada guaranteed livable income that would provide that basic protection for all people in Canada, and as I said, that net beneath them.
So based on this statement, it's pretty clear that they would be comfortable moving forward with a program like this, or at the very least taking a very close look at it. So now that we have a better idea of where all these parties align with this issue, we can talk about whether or not it's likely that this new bill that we talked about at the beginning of the video is going to be passed. And there's one major roadblock that is really standing in the way of this bill in particular, and that's the fact that it was brought to the table by a private member. Since the Liberal Member of Parliament who brought this bill into the House of Commons hasn't been appointed as a federal minister, the amount of time that can be spent on this bill in the House of Commons is limited. As a result, it can take a long time for these types of bills to be debated in the House of Commons, let alone voted on and potentially passed. Now, another thing that holds this back is the fact that if there's an election called, any bills that haven't been passed through at that point will be scrapped and have to be reintroduced introduced after the election when the House of Commons sits again. And as a result, it's not all that likely that this bill will pass, making Chrystia Freeland implement all of these changes in order to do the research and implement these pilot projects. It's not so likely that that's going to happen, but it still could. And again, I'll emphasize, my goal here on the channel isn't to make you think one way or the other. It's to bring all this information to you so that you can make your own educated decision. I'm not going to comment on whether I think it's a good idea or a bad idea. That's for you to think about yourself. But I know there are a lot of strong opinions on this issue, and I want to hear from you as to what you think, whether you think this is going to bankrupt Canada and we don't have the money to do it, or if you think that it could be a very positive program to put into place. Let me know down in the comments either way, which way you sit on this issue. And if you've made it this far into the video, I wanted to take a second to thank you for watching. It's clear that you think this issue is important, so if you haven't already done so, try clicking that share button and sending this video to somebody else who thinks this sort of thing is important. And of course, if you haven't already done so, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. I'm bringing more and more Canadian updates like this, particularly when it has an impact on Canadians and their money. So if you want to support content like that, hit those buttons down there. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.